Hello everyone, welcome back to Major Hi-Fi. I'm Luke. Today we're going to be talking about Bowers Wilkins PI7 true wireless earbuds. So a funny story about Bowers Wilkins, they were actually the first pair of higher end headphones I bought when I was 13. I saved up for their, I believe, C5 earbuds, which I'm not sure if they make anymore. But I had those for many a year. I broke many pairs of them through dropping them in puddles and stepping on them accidentally. But that was kind of my gateway headphone, I guess you could say. And now I'm here reviewing them, so full circle, I guess. These run for about $3.99, which is in the higher range of prices for Bluetooth earbuds. So we're going to talk about them today and see how I feel they hold up to their price. All right, so let's look at what's in the box. All right, so we can open this up. And here we get the charging case, which is just a pretty standard looking charging case. It's got a nice metallic finish on the outside. So you can open this up and see the earbuds, and you just hold down this button here in order to pair with your device. So if you pop one of these out here, you can see they've got a pretty cool look to them. They've got this kind of like nice shiny metal backing on them and then a matte white body. I believe these are also going to be released in black. I think the job of any Bluetooth earbud is to look, you know, interesting, modern, but also be kind of unassuming as to not draw too much attention to it. And these sort of are pretty standard for that. They're not like anything crazy looking, but they look good, and I don't think they're anything that's gonna like, you know, interfere with your outfit or stick out. They are pretty comfortable too. As you can see, they have this kind of like rounded backing to them, so I like that this didn't really like rub up against my ear any weird places. I'm always sort of making sure that any earbud avoids that. You know, you want to be able to wear it for a long time without feeling like it's bruising the inside of your ear. So yeah, these are fine for wearing. They're comfortable. They stay in your ears. So these have quite a few gizmos and gadgets and gears going on inside. So these feature a dual driver system. They have a dynamic driver for the lows and mids and a balanced armature driver for the tweeter. Each unit also features its own dedicated amplifier and advanced DSP engine. The PI7 also features Bowers Wilkins Qualcomm aptX adaptive audio technology, which is supposed to ensure we don't lose any quality even though these are Bluetooth. So they say at 420 kilobits per second, this is supposed to be just as efficient and high quality as linear audio would be at 24-bit/6 kilohertz. This adaptive technology also has a dynamic bit rate, which is supposed to ensure consistent streaming quality and bit error resilience. The PI7 also has a low latency mode, which is supposed to ensure its efficiency whether you're streaming video or playing games, and this sort of automatically adapts to whatever latency needs to be used. There are 6 microphones built into these, which are first of all supposed to ensure that your call quality is crystal clear, and then these also work in tandem with the noise cancellation function by picking up the sounds around you and extremely accurately trying to adjust the levels of noise cancellation to ensure that they are sufficient for whatever's going on. The case features wireless charging and gives us 4 hours of playtime off of a single charge, or we can do a 15-minute quick charge, which gives us an additional 1 hour of playtime, and the overall battery life is 20 hours. The case can also connect directly to your audio source and actually retransmit the audio to your PI7. In terms of the noise canceling function on these, I think it works really well. Most noise canceling headphones at this stage in technology are all very well working. It's not really a matter of do they cancel noise or not, it's more so a matter of do they do it comfortably. So I usually look for, is there too much pressure or sort of that ear filling feeling you get with some where it just feels like unnatural and uncomfortable. These to me did not overdo that, so like I didn't really even notice the noise canceling was on until I turned it off, and then you're like, wow, there's a ton of noise around me. But it didn't feel like that kind of uncomfortable, sealed, like overly pressured, heavy feeling you get with some noise canceling earbuds. All right, so that's all the technical information. Clearly a very advanced headphone, a lot going on here. Towards innovation and lots of different functionalities, but how does it sound? That's what really matters, right? So let's talk about that. So these have a pretty clear V-shape response. So the lows and the highs are the most prominent, whereas the mids are a bit taking a back seat to those. It's not the strongest V-shape I've ever heard. I've definitely heard headphones and earbuds where I'm like, this is a complete, just pulling down in the middle of the frequency spectrum. It's not so over the top, but it's a clear V shape to me. I listened to Experience by Victoria Monet off of her album Jaguar. Highly recommend for all of you pop music lovers. It's a great album. And this song has like all the sort of works of what a headphone needs to translate in terms of like punchy mids, a lot of percussion, really strong high end, tons of detail, and sort of like texturized vocals. So yeah, these did a good job translating the song's kind of intricate mix, giving the percussion a lot of punch, a lot of presence. Overall, it was a great translation. The high end didn't feel overbearing because the song is pretty bright, and I've been listening to it a lot on different headphones, and sometimes it feels like it's just getting way too harsh and sort of like scratchy, I guess. But on these, it was really good. The only complaint I would have with this listen was that it felt like the vocals could have been maybe a little bit more present, but that was about it. I also listened to Blue Wine by Neo, another great kind of like pop song. It's more of a pop ballad, I guess. It's very like piano meets electronic meets cinematic, and this song was like incredible on the PI7. So no problems with the vocals here. Like the vocals were right up front. They were being translated so beautifully. It definitely sort of started to show me the cinematic nature of these earbuds, which I'm gonna get into more later. But yeah, it was a very satisfying kind of like full-bodied, a lot of low end, a lot of punch. It really translated the song with a lot of body and kind of like large atmosphere to it, which is what I wanted to hear. So I liked that a lot too. But at that point, I kind of noticed that I was having a very like 21st century hyper modern pop reaction to these because of their kind of like super polished sound. So I was like, all right, we gotta listen to something older or something that's like at least acoustic, And I find sometimes with newer headphones and kind of like especially headphones that have a little bit more pronounced of a sound signature that they can kind of suck the life out of old recordings because they have too strong of a treatment going on, and it works great for like anything, produced in the last like 10, 20 years. But when you go back before that, it kind of starts to get confused. And so I listened to Nancy and Lee by Nancy Sinatra and Lee Hazelwood, one of my favorite albums of all time. And this album has a very warm, colored sound to it throughout. It was recorded in like 1968, so it definitely has a very specific sound to it, both in terms of the actual songs themselves and the way they were recorded and mixed. So I was kind of a little bit skeptical of how this was gonna go, because I just felt like it was gonna end up sounding really weird and uncomfortable, but I was really impressed by how good it sounded. Like, it was extremely wide, first of all, because this album does have that kind of like older stereo field mixing techniques where things are just panned all over the place and like given a lot more width just kind of throughout the entire instrumentation, and not a ton is really like kept to the middle. And these like really let the mixes breathe and let them open up. It kept all the warmth, but it did clean it up a little bit, but I don't mind that. As long as you're not taking like the life, the energy out of it, I'm fine with them cleaning up the warmth of the album a little bit. And it did that. So it felt like a very clean, but still honest and respectful translation of the album, and I really enjoyed it. I listened to it cover to cover. I found that the V shape was less pronounced. I didn't notice it as much, and that was kind of what I was hoping for, because I don't mind having a pretty pronounced V shape when I'm listening to pop, or having a V shape that really comes through when I'm listening to pop or anything really modern sounding, because that's honestly how a lot of this stuff is mixed anyways. But in terms of older stuff, I want it to be a versatile sound signature that can kind of take a back seat when it needs to, and this does that really well. And then I also listened to a newer album, which is Arcade Fire's Reflector. And this has also a lot of coloring and distortion and like live recordings going on in it. So I was very curious to see how this would translate, and it kind of did a similarly good job. It wasn't overly interfering with the kind of colored vintage feel the album has, and it really conveyed the room sound and the sort of natural, organic recording style and mixing that's used on this album really well. And it definitely did clean it up a little bit, so you're not gonna get a ton of edge with these if that's what you're looking for. They're not very sharp. But let me kind of get into a more detailed description of that. So I'm gonna sort of like talk about the soundstage, the lows, the mids, the highs. The soundstage and imaging on these is nothing like totally out of the blue. I would say it's a little bit above average. Other Bluetooth earbuds I've heard, there's only so wide you can get a mix on an earbud, but they definitely do a good job. I would say they kind of are like true to the song. So if a song is super wide, it'll sound extremely wide and it's not going to pull it in at all or kind of like give it this more linear presentation of it. But if it is not a super wide breadth mix of a song, then this isn't gonna like cast it out further. So it's just gonna kind of give you whatever's there, honestly. And that's enough for me because I kind of don't wanna hear every song super wide, but I definitely want that kind of expansive, immersive feel. So I also don't want it pulling any of the sound inwards more. And it did a good job, I think, of just sort of, translating the soundstage as it was. And if it was super wide, it was capable of going there. In terms of layering, there doesn't seem to be like a ton of blend on these. I kind of went back and forth. Like sometimes I felt like they were doing a fair amount of blending, and other times I felt like the isolation was really good. Overall, the layering on these felt pretty standard. It wasn't super isolated, it wasn't super blended, but it did the trick. All right, so the low end on these have a lot of low end. Like we're talking very strong bass. If you listen to bassy music especially, it's gonna give you like every ounce there is. I didn't find it to have any sort of unpleasant rumble or a swallowing of the rest of the spectrum, but it was definitely very present. So yeah, a lot of low end. I think it's pretty tight and clean in terms of how it's executed, but it is strong. So if you love low end, these are definitely really worth checking out. So the mid-range on these, since we are in a V shape, are not super pronounced. I wouldn't use the word muted because that would imply that they're like dead, but I would say the mids they're not screaming, they're like humming. So vocals are not gonna get a super resonant sound to them generally. It's gonna be much more tailored and sort of cleansed than maybe like a sharper mid-range would be. The high mid is definitely what I'm referring to mostly here. The low mid does have more presence than it, not by like sevenfold, but it's definitely a little bit more forward. The high mid is definitely where we get a lot of that polished sound coming from because it's just very smooth and you're kind of not getting any sharpness. I know some people want a very sharp or forward, intense kind of like mid-range, but for people that want a super smooth, polished, clean mid-range, these do that like 100%. So for the high end, it's a pretty prominent feature on the sound signature of the PI7. I was happy to see though that it wasn't super overdone. I sometimes think that brighter headphones have this kind of slope on the high boost that's very plateaued, so we're just kind of getting like a boost of the entire high section of the frequency spectrum, which is not what you want. These definitely seem a little bit more selective and where they're giving you extra high end, which gives you a little bit more smooth, slightly warm high end, but definitely still that polished, cleanly sound. The high end is definitely not nearly as pronounced as the low end, so I guess if this is really a V-shaped response, it's maybe like a lopsided V. The high end is definitely subdued enough to give these an overall like warmer character and not get that kind of like unpleasant, hollow, overly scooped out sound. Also on the subject of warmth, I think sometimes earbuds and headphones that aren't super heavy in the mid-range have trouble retaining warmth because you're just getting a lot of the kind of most extreme parts of the frequency spectrum. But I think the high end on these and how like refined it is definitely helps these remain warmer even though they don't have a ton of the mid-range going on. And the kind of achieving warmth through a smooth high end and subdued mid-range is a technique that I think works really well if it's done right. And if that's kind of a sound that you like, these are a great example of how that should be done and how that should sound. All right, so another sort of important factor to consider if you're looking at these is that Bowers and Wilkins also released a second set of Bluetooth true wireless earbuds, which is the PI5. I have that right here. So the PI5 runs for $249, so we've got about a $150 price difference between the two, and I would expect that many people are kind of deciding which one they want, why they should get one, why they should get the other, what's the difference. So I'm gonna give you an overview on that too. So the PI5, first of all, does not have the second driver that the PI7 has. So the PI5 just has the dynamic driver. It does not have the balanced armature driver on the tweeter. The PI5 also has a somewhat lower resolution, so we get a 16-bit resolution on this and a 24-bit resolution on the PI7. The PI5 also does not have the retransmission capabilities that the PI7 has. And then the PI7 also has the advanced DSP engine, which we do not see in the PI5, which just gives it overall a bit more power with delivering sound quality. So in terms of sound, I think these are very surprisingly different. I was kind of expecting them to sound similar, I don't know why, but they have pretty different sound signatures. Generally, like I would say, you can tell they're from the same company, but they don't sound like sisters, not even really cousins, like maybe like second cousins. The PI5 still sounds very high quality. It does still have a very impressive build for the price point, but I definitely felt a little sense of increased luxury in terms of the sound signature on the PI7, which is sort of what I expected. In terms of the frequency response, the PI5 is definitely a lot darker and warmer than the PI7. So the PI5 has a much less subdued mid-range. It's not sharp, it's still pretty smooth, but it's comparatively to the PI7, it's a lot more forward. The PI5 also has significantly less high end, I would say. It sounds comparatively a lot less bright than the PI7. So it doesn't really have the same sheen or sort of like extreme polish that we get on the PI7, but it is still pretty clean sounding, but it just felt like, yeah, very different flavors, different tastes. In terms of low end response, I think the PI7 has a little bit more of like a sub-heavy bass response. This one still has a fair amount of low end, pretty comparable actually to the PI7, but the PI5's low end is not quite as sort of like all-encompassing, I guess, but it's still very strong. This is still a pretty bassy earbud. So yeah, by no means does the PI5 sound cheap compared to the PI7. It does sound a little bit less refined, but also it just sounds really different. I almost feel like the choice between these is definitely partially in terms of like your budget, but also in terms of your taste. These are definitely a bit more clean, like I said, the V-shape, and then these are warmer, a bit more sharpness in the mid-range. They're not total inverse sound signatures, but in terms of the mids and the highs, they're pretty on different ends of the spectrum. If you'd like to compare these to other true wireless Bowers & Wilkins products or true wireless products from other companies, you can check out our headphone ranking tool on Major Hi-Fi. We have a section for true wireless. We also have a section for IEMs and headphones. Back to the PI7, which is our focus today. I think overall this is a pretty satisfying listen. If you like a fair amount of low-end response and a healthy serving of brightness without too much sharpness in the mid-range, then these give you exactly what you want. They have definitely a very clean, polished sound, like I said, but they avoid feeling sterile by still retaining a fair amount of warmth. And I think that they definitely give their competition a run for the money in terms of the very large, ever-growing Bluetooth earbud market. These are just a fun pair of earbuds. They have a very engaging, cinematic, impactful sound to them. Their more subdued mid-range may not be for everybody, but I think that most will find they have a very pleasant, fine-tuned sound and that they do meet the expectations of their price point. So those are my thoughts on the Bowers & Wilkins PI7. If you would like to read more about these, I also did a written review on Major Hi-Fi, which I will link in the description. If you have any further questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'd be happy to answer. And until next time, happy listening.